Thank you, Rebecca. I hope everybody can hear me. Let's just try by asking you if you can hear me okay.
I can hear you just fine.
Really good. Okay. Well, thank you very much for the introduction. Indeed, on Friday, Thursday and Friday, I was in New York. Friday was a very important day on the international calendar. It was the International Day of Holocaust Remembrance. The United Nations belatedly, nevertheless, better late than never, established this annual day on the international calendar about half a dozen years ago to commemorate the Holocaust. So each year they hold in the General Assembly Hall of the UN a commemoration, and for each of these years, B'nai B'rith has been the only NGO, the only non-governmental organization, that has also held its own commemoration on that day in New York in connection with the UN program. Indeed, in the UN's publicity about this day, they included our program in their listing. A bit about our program, because we held it before the UN did theirs. We held our program at the Baha'i Center, the Baha'i religion. I'm sure many of you know of it. I would say parenthetically, the Baha'i have many followers in Iran, and they are really discriminated against in many ways by the Iranian government. The Baha'i religion actually has its international headquarters in Haifa. Some of you may have seen their beautiful headquarters, beautiful garden overlooking Haifa Bay. The subject of our program was Holocaust restitution. That means the effort that has been made now for many years to restitute properties or to compensate Holocaust victims and their families for the properties that were confiscated and taken by the Nazis, and then actually by communist governments after the fall of the Nazis in 1945. B'nai B'rith has been very active in this effort. Many people refer to the Holocaust not only as the largest murder in history, but also the largest robbery in history. And in many countries in Central and Eastern Europe, there are thousands and thousands of properties, homes, apartments, businesses, factories, synagogues, and there's communal property, so there would be synagogues, there would be shivot, community building. And so we held our program. Our speaker was Ari Buchheister. Ari Buchheister is probably the leading expert on this issue working in the Jewish community today. He is chief of staff at the Conference on Material Claims Against Germany, otherwise known as the Claims Conference, and he made the presentation. We had a full room at the Baha'i Center. There were a number of Holocaust survivors and others who came, and the Jerusalem Post was there as well. So it was a very important program. Then we went over to the UN, and at the UN, the General Assembly Hall was pretty much filled for an interesting program whose topic was, for the day, Rescue During the Holocaust, the Courage to Care. And there were a number of different speakers speaking about, I think, 3 or 4 specific cases of rescue during the Holocaust, including a story in Albania where a Jewish family was saved by an Albanian family. There was, of course, the Raoul Wallenberg story, and there were a couple of other stories there as well. There were very important speakers. There was also a speaker, Professor Ethel Brooks, who is a Romani sociologist and associate professor at Rutgers University. You know, the Roma, which, popularly called the Gypsies, but the correct term is Roma and Sinti, 2 different groups, but belonging more or less to the same demographic, spoke about the terrible story of the persecution of the Roma during the Holocaust as well. So it was a really important program, and the keynote speaker was Professor Mordechai Palviel, who himself was a Holocaust survivor, child survivor and a former director of the Department of the Righteous at Yad Vashem. So it was important for B'nai B'rith to be present in both places, and it's a day that all of us, of course, take very seriously, and B'nai B'rith's very proud to be involved in. On Thursday, because this will be the second subject that I would like to raise, on Thursday, I went to meet the Canadian ambassador to the United Nations. Canada was one of 9 countries, only 9 countries, to vote against the effort to upgrade the status of the Palestinians at the United Nations to what they call non-member state status. And 9 countries included, of course, our own country. Israel voted against, of course, the Czech Republic, Panama, and there were only a few other countries that did so. Of course, we opposed this effort to raise the status of the Palestinians. We opposed it because one of the tenets of the peace process is that neither side shall take unilateral actions on moving their agenda ahead in the absence of negotiation. And of course, the Palestinians have not taken the offer of the Israeli government to get back to the table to negotiate an agreement between the Palestinians and the Israelis. We also are concerned that this upgrade by the Palestinians will now allow them to have access to a whole range of UN agencies, including the International Criminal Court, to press their effort to, I believe, to delegitimize Israel in front of world public opinion. The International Criminal Court, for example, could be used to charge various Israelis, whether they be in the military or they be civilian political figures, with war crimes against humanity. And that could start a whole chain of effort to prevent them from traveling from country to country and actually assigning pariah status to Israeli officials. Extremely dangerous. It's a dangerous path to go down. The Palestinians were able to get 138 votes, many of them from the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, from the non-aligned movement. There were 41 abstentions. Unfortunately, Europe was divided on this issue. It should not have been divided. But there were some courageous countries that really stood out, and one was Canada. Continues to be a real good friend of the United States, good friend of Israel. And I went to visit the Canadian ambassador as part of a series of meetings that David Michaels and I have been having with the ambassadors of key countries at the UN. And that was a meeting that I think was extremely important. You know, we always ask countries to help out. It is equally important for us, once they do the right thing, to thank them. And that's really one of the reasons that I went. The other reason was to discuss the Iranian threat, continuing threat. Here, I'll just raise it in a minute. We have a situation now where some people are predicting that by mid-year, Iranians will have enough fissionable material to create a nuclear weapon. They already have the ability through a missile system to deliver a weapon. They have a pretty advanced missile and rocket system. And the only thing that remains for them to do once they have the fissionable material and make the bomb is to weaponize and to work out a way to put that weapon onto the rocket. So this is going to be a real year of decision for the Iranian issue. The UN is very much involved. There are sanctions against Iran, not as tough as they could be, but there are sanctions nevertheless. And so I raised that issue with the Canadian ambassador as well. I just close by saying that the UN is, of course, and has been over most of its history. It was created in 1945 in San Francisco. B'nai B'rith was present at that time as one of the 2 or 3 key international Jewish organizations. We received our first credentials as an NGO at the UN in 1947. We opened up the first full-time office on UN affairs at the UN in the Jewish community in 1959. So we've been very much involved at the UN, but much of what we do, especially over the last few decades, has related to standing up for Israel, advocating for Israel in an organization that has become increasingly biased against Israel. In fact, in March we will go again to Geneva for the meetings of the UN Human Rights Council, where Israel is year in and year out the subject of resolutions, anti-resolutions, and during the week that those resolutions are going to be considered, we meet with heads of delegations, ambassadors, and others in Geneva. So the UN is an organization that we're not happy about, but that we can't ignore, and we think it's important for us to be really in the middle of that fight, to stand up for Israel, which is what we do.